Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I hope everyone's as psyched about the NFL playoffs coming up this weekend as I am. I just did my quarterback ranking for the 2024-2025 NFL season on my channel, so go check that out if you haven't already seen it. But real quick guys, before we get into the video, if you enjoy watching NFL videos and like what you see so far, do me a massive favor and subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video while you're at it. I really appreciate it and it'll help the channel massively. Also, do let me know what videos you want to see next in the comments. Today, I'll be doing my wide receiver rankings for the top 30 or 31 wide receivers from this season. It's not exactly just based on this season's performance. It's who I would want on my team at this moment in time. So heading into next year or heading into the playoffs right now, who would I want on my team? And I'm going to separate it out into 6 tiers. We're going to have best of the best. These are the elite options. Number one guys who you can trust in a big spot in the playoffs. These are the guys I would want most. The next tier is elite number one options. And these guys are all going to be great. If one of these guys is your number one option on your team, you're going to have no issues at receiver. If you have one of these guys on your team, you got a go-to guy who can get open against press coverage, get open one-on-one, and you can go to in big spots. The third tier is a good wide receiver one. These guys are solid. If these guys are your number one on your offense could be pretty good, but you probably don't have the highest possible ceiling for your offense. The fourth tier is a fine wide receiver one. These guys are serviceable, but you guys are probably not going to have a good offense if this is your top dog. The tier after that, bad wide receiver ones. If this is the best receiver on your team, you're probably struggling at the receiver spot. You're going to have trouble against the top tier corners, against the best defenses. You're not going to have guys that can get open consistently if this is your number one guy. And then at the bottom tier, these are good wide receiver twos. If these guys are the best wide receiver on your team, you're probably in big trouble. But they're very good players, and they're probably good enough to be great number two options. So that's the bottom tier. But these guys, just to keep in mind, these guys are still phenomenal wide receivers, and I would still want them on my team. Starting off with the top tier, we got the best of the best. And the first guy I'm throwing in there is obviously Justin Jefferson. If you guys have Ja'Marr Chase at the top of this, that's cool. I have Ja'Marr Chase right behind Justin Jefferson. I personally think Justin Jefferson is still the best receiver in the NFL. He just doesn't have as good quarterback play as Ja'Marr Chase. But man, Justin Jefferson is still off to an absolutely insane start to his career. Has already had an 1,800-yard season, added another 1,500-yard season this year. On pace to be a first ballot Hall of Famer and one of the top receivers of all time. I got Justin Jefferson at number one. Gets open against all types of coverage. And then we got Ja'Marr Chase at number two, of course. Triple Crown winner this year. Just an unreal season. Led the league in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns, of course. Now, Ja'Marr Chase is better after the catch. So if you had him at number one, I've got no issues with that. Ja'Marr Chase is just an insane player. He's definitely more explosive and more of a home run threat. But I still got Justin Jefferson at the top for his ability to win on a play-to-play basis. And the final guy I have in the best of the best tier is still going to be Tyreek Hill. Now, you guys might disagree with this one, but I still think Tyreek Hill is best of the best level option. He's coming off 2 back-to-back seasons of over 1,700 yards with the Miami Dolphins, and he's still the most electric player to watch in the league, even though he had a bit of a down year with Tua's injuries and just a down year in general for the Dolphins. I think we all know going into a playoff game, if you had to pick one guy on this list, you couldn't get to more guys before you put Tyreek Hill up here. So still give me Tyreek Hill in the best of the best tier. Moving on to the elite tier, these guys are still amazing, but I just think they're a half step below the best of the best guys. And the first guy in that tier is going to be CeeDee Lamb for me. CeeDee Lamb has been awesome for the Dallas Cowboys the last couple years. And I think he maybe has an argument to be in the top tier with those guys. But I do think he's just a half step behind. He doesn't win on a play-to-play basis as much as Justin Jefferson, and he's not as much of a home run threat as Ja'Marr Chase and Tyreek Hill, but I think he's still awesome. I'd have him in the elite tier. Next up, A.J. Brown, just a physical freak of nature. He's a great deep ball threat and also a pretty good possession receiver, although the last season, Jalen Hurts didn't throw him as many short balls, and so his after-the-catch threat has been neutralized just a little bit, but still on the deep ball, I can't think of anyone better than him in the league. A.J. Brown's still a monster. And the next guy in this tier is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown for me. Probably the most consistent guy on this list behind the top two. Amon-Ra St. Brown, just a receptions monster, go-to guy on third down, was awesome in the red zone this year as well with 12 touchdowns. The reason he can't be in the top tier for me, though, is not as good of a jump ball guy, not a home run threat at all, really. So I just think from a big play standpoint, he's not as good as the guys ahead of him. But from possession to possession, play to play basis, if you need 5 yards on third down, give me Amon-Ra St. Brown over just about any of these guys. Next up, still in the elite tier, we got Nico Collins. I mean, what a season and a half, 2 seasons this guy's had for the Houston Texans. He has a great relationship with CJ Stroud, absolute freak athlete like AJ Brown. He's a monster on the outside, good at the point of the catch, and he's gotten way better with his route running. He's a true go-to guy in the NFL this year and last year, and I do think he belongs in the elite tier with these guys. He's maybe not quite as good as CeeDee Lamb and AJ Brown, but I'd still have him in the same tier. And the last guy I have in this tier is going to be Puka Nacua. He just had his second year, and yeah, he had some injuries this year. But if you put together his rookie season and the games he was at full strength this year, man, this guy has an argument to be just about as good as anyone not named Jefferson and Chase. He's been just insane. His yards per game numbers are fantastic. He's got a great relationship with Matt Stafford, and he's taken over as the number one guy in that offense over Cooper Kupp. He's one of the toughest receivers I've ever seen. This guy takes massive shots and just bounces back up like it's nothing. He's a good route runner on the outside. He's got super strong hands as well, makes super tough contested catches. Just not quite as explosive as some of these other guys, so he doesn't have a big home run threat. He's not going to score you 80-yard touchdowns and things like that, but I'd still have him in this tier. Moving on to the next tier, this is the good wide receiver 1 tier. These are guys who I think if they're your number one, your offense can be really good, but these guys are just not at the level of the elite and best of the best tier guys. The first guy I have in this tier is going to be Malik Neighbors, and I think next season he could easily move up to elite, but for now I have him at the top of this tier. He was so impressive this season, so good after the catch, so explosive, such a good deep threat, home run guy for sure, but I think he still has to work on some of the intermediate and short routes. Got to be a better possession receiver to catch up to the rest of those guys, but still, Malik Neighbors definitely has to be this high. The next guy I have in this tier is Drake London, and Drake London really, really impressed me this season. Such a big physical receiver, awesome red zone threat. Showed some good stuff with Michael Penix at the end of the season, and he was in the top 5 in receiving yards in the entire league this season, so just a crazy impressive season for Drake London. I think big improvement from his previous year, and Drake London's got to be here in this tier. The next guy up is Garrett Wilson, and I feel bad putting Garrett Wilson here because I think he definitely has the potential to be higher, but I think he just hasn't shown the volume and maybe the red zone ability to move up with the rest of those guys. Garrett Wilson is such a silky route runner. He makes DBs look like fools sometimes, and he's got a pretty good connection with Aaron Rodgers, but I just don't think he saw the targets this year and just didn't see the overall production that you would need to have to move up. But man, I think Garrett Wilson is certainly talented enough to move up, and he makes some of the most spectacular plays out of anyone on this list. That one-handed catch this year was something else. Next guy up, we got another rookie. Give me Brian Thomas Jr. in this tier. What a rookie season, man. Brian Thomas Jr. is already one of the best deep ball guys in the league. Super explosive on the outside, blows by DBs, really good at the catch point, and awesome after the catch. Brian Thomas is one of those guys who, if you leave him one-on-one on the outside, he's burning you deep. I think he's got to work more on his short and intermediate routes, kind of like Malik Neighbors, but maybe even to a higher extent. Brian Thomas Jr. has got to be better on third down, got to be a little bit better on those quick timing routes, but I think he can get there, and he also has the potential to move up to elite next year. But Brian Thomas Jr. is an awesome wide receiver. Next up, we got old, reliable, Mr. 1,000 yards, Mike Evans for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here. Mike Evans just completed his 11th straight 1,000-yard season, tying Jerry Rice for the most consecutive of all time. That's one of the most impressive records I've ever seen. But I think at this point in his career, Mike Evans can't be higher than this. He barely cleared 1,000 yards this year, and I know he did have an injury, but just watching the games, it looks like he's lost a bit of a step as a deep ball guy. He's still awesome in the red zone and an awesome jump ball contested catch guy, but I think he's lost a little bit of explosiveness. Still an awesome receiver, though. Next up, I think this is one you guys might disagree with, But I've got T. Higgins this high. T. Higgins, of course, has been playing alongside Jamar Chase for all these years, and so he's been overshadowed a little bit. But if you actually watch the games, it's hard to find that many receivers that are better than T. Higgins. And I think if he gets a chance to go to his own team next year, you guys are going to see him absolutely flourish and maybe even move up this list. I think T. Higgins is just one of the most talented guys in the league. Awesome contested catch guy, awesome in the red zone, super physical, and a more polished route runner than most people give him credit for. He wins in the short, wins intermediate, wins deep, wins on the outside, wins over the middle. This guy's special, and I think if he gets more chances next year on a different team, he could be that guy. The only reason I don't have him higher right now is because he hasn't shown it, and he hasn't been getting as much double coverage as some of the other guys because he's been playing across from Jamar Chase. But I think T. Higgins is amazing. Moving on to the fine wide receiver 1 tier, if these guys are the top guy on your offense now, I think your offense is capped at a ceiling, but these guys are all still very talented players who've had great seasons in their own right. The first guy I have in this tier is going to be Davante Adams, and it's sad to see Davante Adams slip to this tier because a couple years ago he was the clear best wide receiver in the entire NFL. But I think Davante Adams has lost a step. He's not as athletic as he used to be. He's not as good after the catch. He's now more of a possession receiver. But I don't think he's as good as he used to be. But I do think Davante Adams is still really good. Still one of the best route runners in the league. But he just is not as explosive anymore. The next guy up is Terry McLaurin. And Terry McLaurin had an awesome season for the Washington Commanders. Had a great relationship with Jaden Daniel. And caught, I think, 13 touchdown passes this year. That's outrageous. And Terry McLaurin's one of the best deep ball guys, one of the best red zone guys in the NFL. But I don't think he's as consistent on a play-to-play, game-to-game basis as some of the guys ahead of him. He doesn't win as often in man coverage. He's still really good, but I just don't think from a consistency standpoint I can have him any higher than this. And that may be a hot take after this year. I think some people might have him higher, but I think this spot is perfect for him right here. Next up, Ladd McConkey. I think I'm probably higher on Ladd than most of you guys are. But Ladd McConkey, I think, is way more athletic than people give him credit for. He's a 4.33 guy, and he runs away from DBs. It's almost like they're a little surprised to see how fast he is, and he just blows by them, especially after the catch, which I think is something not all of us expected coming into the NFL this season for Ladd. He's also a great route runner, really smart guy against zone coverage, and has a great relationship with Justin Herbert already. I think Ladd McConkey can move up this tier list as well next year, but I think he's here for now. His only weakness is he's not a big contested catch guy. He's not going to be jumping over receivers. He's on the smaller side, but I still think he's awesome. Next up, JSN, and this was a breakout year for JSN. JSN's a super polished route runner, a little more athletic than people give him credit for. He just has a knack of getting open. He's not a deep ball, not really a home run guy, but he's got a huge knack of getting open, and I think he took over the wide receiver 1 role on the Seahawks offense from DK Metcalf this year. He and Geno Smith had a great connection. I think big things are coming from JSN in the future. I think he's a good wide receiver 1 at this point. Next up, we have Lamar Jackson's guy, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. Zay Flowers is a speedster, but he also is a pretty good route runner, and he wins consistently against man coverage. He's not as good on the physical side, but I would say Zay Flowers gets open, decent after the catch, pretty explosive, just not as consistent as some of the guys above him. Honestly, just not as talented as some of them. Maybe that's because he's on the smaller side. I don't know, but Zay Flowers just doesn't do it for me as much as some of the guys ahead of him. But he is going to be the last guy in this tier for me. The next group of guys, these guys I would consider bad wide receiver 1s. If these guys are the top receiver on your offense, your passing game might be capped unless you have an elite quarterback. The first guy I have in this tier is going to be Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs. And Rashee Rice got injured earlier on in this year and was out for most of the year. But I don't think just because you got injured that makes you a bad player. Rashee Rice had an insane start to the year, had 100 yards in 2 of the first 3 games this season. He's got a phenomenal connection with Pat Mahomes. And he just gets open, man. He's more of a slot guy, I think, for the Chiefs. But on third down, when you need a play, Rashee Rice just gets open on slants, over the middle of the field. Hard to find a guy better than him at those particular skills. I think where Rashee Rice lets you down a little bit is he's not really a deep threat. He's not super explosive, although he's still physical and solid after the catch, but he just doesn't make big plays down the field like some of the guys ahead of him. but still very solid and a great possession receiver. Next guy is Devontae Smith, who is filling the number 2 role on the Philadelphia Eagles this far in his career. But I think Devontae Smith has potential for more. And if he was the wide receiver 1 on your team, I think he could be serviceable. But I think the problem with Devontae Smith is he's just a bit too small. I'm not sure if he could handle being the number 1 guy at all times. And his range is still a little bit limited. He's not really a contested catch guy, although he is a very polished route runner and surprisingly good down the field for his size. But I just don't see it as maybe your top dog. I do love Devontae Smith, though, and he still is a phenomenal wide receiver. The next guy in this tier, and this hurts to put him here, is Brandon Ayuk. I had really high hopes for Brandon Ayuk this year as a 49ers fan, but he really disappointed me. Obviously had all the contract issues in the offseason and came into the season maybe a little rusty, a little out of practice, and he just didn't look up to speed at the start of the season. He still didn't really have too many issues getting open, although it didn't look like he was creating as much separation as he did last year and in the past. And then he did have problems with drops this year, which was really, really frustrating to watch. And I think you could argue that Brandon Ayuk doesn't even belong on this tier list after this year. But for me, I think Brandon Ayuk is still good enough to be here. I just hope he has a bounce back year next year. The next guy up is pretty controversial. We have George Pickens next up, and I really don't like watching George Pickens. I think his demeanor on the field is pretty annoying to watch, and he makes a lot of boneheaded decisions and some pretty bad plays, but just on pure talent alone, he has to get here. He might be the best jump ball guy, contested catch guy on this whole list. He's an awesome deep threat, great red zone threat, but I just don't think he does the job for you on a play-to-play basis. He doesn't really get open consistently. A lot of his big plays are just spectacular jump ball catches, which is cool and it's a great skill to have, but it can't be the only thing you rely on. I don't think George Pickens will ever have enough volume of targets to get higher on this list because he just doesn't get open enough, and maybe his demeanor stops him from being that consistent guy you need as your number 1. I also have DJ Moore in this tier, and DJ Moore had a bit of a disappointing year this season, although he still racked up a ton of targets and a ton of catches. Caleb Williams kind of turned him into the underneath guy for this offense, which was really annoying to see because DJ Moore in the past has been a phenomenal deep threat and really got open down the field, and that's kind of where he made his name. But I think as Caleb Williams gets better and maybe gets a little bolder with his decision making, DJ Moore is still going to be the guy for this Bears offense. Super talented against man coverage. He does just get open, and he's been pretty good again after the catch in his career, although you didn't see it as much this year. I think DJ Moore still can be the number 1 on your team, as we've seen in the past. And lastly in this tier, I do still have Chris Olave. We obviously didn't get to see too much of him this year, but based on what we've seen in the past, I think Chris Olave belongs on this list. He's been unfortunate to have some pretty shocking quarterback play over the last couple of years with Derek Carr and that revolving door of quarterbacks they've had down in New Orleans. But I think Chris Olave does belong here, man. Chris Olave is super talented. He's really quicker than most people give him credit for. He's an awesome deep ball guy. He just wins down the field. And I think he's also pretty polished in the intermediate and short. I think where he doesn't maybe match up to some of these guys is he's not going to be super physical at the catch point. He's not going to be winning those contested balls. And, maybe he's not as reliable on third downs. You can't just throw it to him and hope. He kind of just has to be open. And although he is good at it, I don't think you can rely on that as much as some of the guys on this list above him. But that's going to do it for the bad wide receiver 1 tier. For the last tier of this video, we have guys who at this point are good wide receiver 2s. If these guys are your number 2, you probably have an elite offense. But I think these guys would struggle to be number 1s. The first guy I've got is Stephon Diggs, and you guys might not like this. Some people might have him higher, some people might have him off this tier list entirely. But I think Stephon Diggs still at this point in his career belongs to be on this tier list, man. Stephon Diggs still is phenomenal underneath. He still wins against man coverage. He's still great on key downs. If you need a big play on third down, if you need just a reception, you need somebody to win underneath, Stephon Diggs is still your guy. I think he's lost a step downfield. He's not as good of a deep threat anymore, and he's not as good after the catch. But I think as a possession receiver, he still deserves to be on this tier list. Next up, we got Chris Godwin, and it was super sad to see Chris Godwin go out for the year, but he had an awesome start to the year. He still is just so smart at getting open over the middle of the field. He just wins. I mean, he's not he's not that explosive. He's not going to jump over you. He's not really going to run away from you, but he just has a knack of getting open. Like some of the other guys I mentioned, whenever Baker Mayfield needed a big play, Chris Godwin was just open. I think he's got a really good understanding of space and coverage, and so he's just always in the right spot. So Chris Godwin's still on this list. Hopefully, big comeback next year. Next up, a guy who really impressed me this year, Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison is a huge big play guy for the Minnesota Vikings. He scores a lot of touchdowns, catches a lot of balls deep down the field, but I think on a play-to-play basis is not as good as some of these other guys. I think he still deserves to be on this tier list because he's actually just awesome down the field. He wins, he beats corners in man coverage, and of course he has a phenomenal track record. Biletnikoff Award winner in college, pretty good immediately coming out into the NFL. I think Jordan Addison's an awesome receiver. I think he could move up this list, but playing in Justin Jefferson's shadow, it's always going to be hard to show the needed qualities to move up, but I got him here. Next up, a guy who really disappointed me this season, DK Metcalf. And DK Metcalf has been someone who a lot of people have overrated over the last couple of years just because of how athletic he is, and he is a physical freak of nature. One of the fastest receivers in the NFL, one of the biggest, one of the hardest to bring down, but he just doesn't get open that often. He's not a very polished route runner for a high-level wide receiver, and he's no longer even the number one guy on his team. I think JSN took that over this year. DK Metcalf is a really frustrating guy to watch because for a guy with such an insane physical toolkit, he's all the tools you would need, but he just doesn't seem to be able to get open against man coverage. I mean, you throw him a deep ball, he can still win, and sometimes he does still win deep down the field, but he just doesn't create enough separation on his routes to be a go-to guy for me. Next up, I've got a surprising one, and it's Courtland Sutton, who I never would have thought would have made this tier list, but this year he did really impress me. And in fact, I might even have him over DK Metcalf at this point. I think Courtland Sutton had a pretty good rapport with Bo Nix and has always been a good red zone guy, but I think he showed me a little more on a play-to-play basis this year. He was creating a little more separation on his routes, and although I never think he's going to be, I don't know, 110, 120 catch guy, he's never going to be that level of possession receiver, but he's still a great guy to have on the outside. Wins down the field, wins at the catch point, wins in the red zone. Still a super valuable guy to have. And the last guy I'm going to have on this list today, we've already gone through 30, so this guy's just an honorable mention, but I got to give a shout out to Jerry Jeudy for a really strong year this year. I think he had almost 1,300 yards this year, and although some of that was inflated by the Jameis Winston games where Jameis was just locking in on him and targeting him 10 plus times a game, but I was impressed with Jerry Jeudy this year. He showed me a lot more than he showed in the past, and we've all known he's talented based on his tape at Alabama, but he's never really shown that it would translate to the NFL. This was the first year that he showed he could be a go-to guy. If we see it for another year with maybe a non-Jameis Winston quarterback, I could see him moving up this list. But unfortunately, the Browns are just in dire straits as far as quarterbacks go. So he's just got to be here for me right now. And that's going to do it for today's video, guys. This is the final tier list. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, what you guys might have done differently. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please do leave a like and subscribe. It'll really help me out. But anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.